Let's talk about the core strategy for the error IDs. Here's an example of an error ID question. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to read the sentence, obviously. Second thing, if you spot the error, circle it, and of course, check the rest of the choices. This is what I mentioned before. If you're reading this and you say, oh, A looks wrong, circle, and then you just ignore these choices, you might find, if you had read later, that, oh, wait a minute, B also looks like it's wrong. So now I have to make a tough choice, or at least I have to look a little bit more closely at the two choices and see which one is right. So this is just a way to prevent silly mistakes that could be avoided. Even if you see the error or think you see the error immediately, always check the rest of the choices. Except, of course, E. You really can't check that, so to speak. But always check at least the other three choices just to make sure you're not missing anything else that's rather obvious. Now, of course, if you spot the error, that's very nice and that makes things easy. But most of the time, or a lot of the time, we're not going to spot the error right away. So what do we do? So what we want to do then is check each choice as a part of speech and look for error patterns for each. So what do I mean by this? Well, I would go through the sentence and I would say, okay, every year toy manufacturers gather groups of children. So I would say, what part of speech is this? What kind of word is this? Well, gather, here this is a verb. And then I would say to myself, well, what are the patterns? What are the errors that I know go with verbs, at least on the SAT? Well, things like subject-verb agreement, of course, is the big one. Tense, parallelism, verb form, structure issues, such as with fragments and comma splices, right? All these kind of things that go with verbs. We can start thinking in terms of those and say, okay, do any of those apply here? And in this case, we would say, no, none of them apply here. It's fine. And then we would look at B and say, what kind of word or words is B? What kind of word or word is C? What kind of word or words are D, right? And we can figure out based off of those, which of the kind of errors do we know appear again and again. And instead of looking at this randomly, trying to get the feel of it, we analyze it. We say, okay, this is C. This is a relative pronoun. What are the errors I know with relative pronouns? Any of those made here? No. Okay, cross it off, move on. So that's the way you're going to want to get down here to really analyze it. Think in terms of errors. Think in terms of patterns. Think in terms of what you've seen before on SATs. That's what's going to maximize your score. Of course, sometimes you're not going to find an error because there is one. And if you can't find an error, you're going to want to pick E, which is your no error. And in later videos, again, I'm going to talk about just a few ways how we can feel at least a little bit more comfortable picking an E. General tips. Do not select a choice because you write it differently. Again, really important. A lot of people out there fancy themselves, editors or whatever they might be, right? They like to proofread, whatever they like to do. And they sometimes like to make changes to sentences based off of how they would rather write it or how it could be written differently. Yeah, sure, these sentences could be written differently, and sometimes they are awkwardly written, but there's a reason why it's awkwardly written. It's because they're trying to test a particular rule. But just because it's awkward in one way, or just because you could or would yourself write it a different way, doesn't mean that's the error, right? We're focusing on errors, on actual grammar rules being broken, not on some kind of subjective interpretation of that sentence. Now, this is especially true for the error IDs, because error IDs, there's really no issue of wordiness. You're not going to see a wordiness error in an error ID. So here, especially, it's important to focus on those rules and don't make choices based off of gut, intuition kind of stuff. You want to focus on those errors. Most right answers require a change, not an addition or a deletion. So this is kind of a minor point, but it's never going to be the case where you look at this and you would say, look, I think B is wrong because I wouldn't use the word as, or get rid of the word as. Often, as it is, I think in this case, choices of toys. Yeah, whatever I don't know. We'll go over this one in a later section, but it's not going to be simply about removing or adding a word. Generally, it's going to be replacing a word or changing the word in some way. So just be careful about that. Don't eliminate. Don't play copy editor. Don't cross off words like you can say, D could be just popular, not most. Well, maybe, but in this case, find errors, focus on that. Don't look at, again, crossing off words, eliminating, copy editing, that kind of thing. If you don't spot the error, check each choice. Don't just pick a choice because it sounds wrong. Again, just reiterating that. Expect at least one no error E in the hard. So in your 25 to 29 or so, expect at least one E, just like with the improving sentences where you'd see an A in the hards for the same reason, right? They want to make sure on the hard questions that you don't overcorrect when presented with something that seems like it could be grammatically incorrect. They want to make sure, especially in the hard cases, that you don't overcorrect and pick something that's right when you think it's wrong. And overall, you should expect in the 12 to 29 section around 3 to 4 E's or so. Again, general rule, don't take this as gospel. You could see 2, you could see 5, maybe rarely, but if you see 0 or 1 E's, or if you pick 7 E's, you probably made a mistake. So you're going to want to go back and check and make sure. And then finally, again, always check all choices, just to reiterate, because it's so important. It just prevents you from making mistakes. It helps you be more accurate. All right, let's move into the first set of errors, which is the biggest and most important error, and that's going to be your subject-verb agreement.